Hello and welcome, friends.
Hi.
Hi,
Hello.
welcome to the Child of the Redwoods Live. We are two former public school teachers who actually chose to homeschool our own children. It surprised us too. And we are here to share our views on education, parenting, talk about Montessori, talk about life and love. My name is Aubrey Hargis.
And I'm David. And we welcome you wherever you are in your journey, whether you're choosing to homeschool or not, whether your kids are real little or they're getting older, wherever you may be on that journey, we welcome you, because our goal here is to help you decide what kind of an education you want to give your own children, and make sure you have the information and the knowledge to go off and do that. Because whether you homeschool or not, we believe education is a journey you're going to take with your children, and the opportunities for learning start over every day.
They really do.
So welcome to May. I think this is our first live for May.
I think it is.
It must be. And we're continuing our book discussion. We have part 2 of The Child as the Teacher. If you missed part 1, you can go check it out, the previous live, or you can listen to the replay as a podcast. And if you are watching this replay and would rather listen to it, this will be also podcast as a podcast on Tuesday. So a couple different ways to enjoy. If you have read the book, we'd love to get your comments as we talk through it. And if you haven't, there's still a chance. We have 3 more parts to go over the next 6 weeks.
I would also like to say that a lot of people don't know that you can actually request that your public library carry books. So usually if you just talk to your librarian, sometimes if you live in a bigger city, you might even be able to just do it online. Just send a little request. So we are not affiliated with the author of this book, but it's a great thing to do to make Montessori more available in your local community. Yeah. Make a biography a little more available.
That's right.
Hi, Lena and Sabina. I'm so glad you guys could join us. The chat is going to be open the whole time. So anytime you guys have questions about something that we're talking about that relates to part 2 of this biography, go ahead and submit that in the chat, and we'll make sure that we get to that.
Exactly.
So first, we actually want to talk a little bit. We try and get a little bit vulnerable here and talk about our own homeschooling every single session. And so to give you guys a little hint of what's up, we have an 11-and-a-half-year-old who's about to turn 12 soon, and a 14-and-a-half-year-old who's about to turn 15 soon. So our life might be different from your life if you have little babies or toddlers, like a lot of people who are just discovering Montessori and homeschooling do have. But to give you some tips, of things that we've learned along the way, something that we've been doing this week is we've been doing a lot of writing, and I wanted to show you a tip that I actually learned from my public school teaching days, which kind of intermingled with my Montessori exploration and observation days, is when I taught in this one wonderful school. It was basically constructivist philosophy, teaching basically 2nd and 3rd graders primarily. Every child needed a draft book, and what it looked like was just a regular composition book, lined, okay? Very, very simple, but every child had one. And the sole purpose of this draft book was to just write in it freely without having to write anything formal or think about anything formal. And the reason I bring this up to you is because my son and I have been having a lot of fun writing in our draft books. We've been writing a lot of really silly stories recently. And I wanted to let you know that your modeling of it is just as important as your child's doing.
Yeah, that's right.
I get a lot of questions from parents who take our courses, like, how do I get my child to actually write? My child seems resistant to writing, or they don't seem to want to write. The biggest tip is you got to write yourself.
That's right.
You've got to do that modeling. And so there's no reason to expect your child to enjoy writing or to want to do any kind of writing if you're not also doing that writing. And so something that we do in our family is we write together. We'll literally sit down at the table, and whoever's kind of there, sometimes David and I both participate, sometimes it's just him, sometimes it's just me and the kids, but we'll just make it like a whole little writer's workshop.
That's right.
As a family. And it's just been this tradition we've had for quite a long time to write together and to share these experiences together.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not just the writing, it's the kind of the key to the whole of it. Different for different ages. But overall, if you're going to use this Montessori approach, and I think any kind of high quality teaching approach, you really have to give yourself over to it.
Yes.
And really, that's why we say it's a journey you take with your children, because you really do have to do it when you teach any kind of lesson. So if I'm teaching a lesson on geography, naming the states or the countries, you have to do that with them. It's not we don't believe that you're going to get the same results if you just put them in front of a worksheet or a digital
or
screen.
Even a piece of paper that's blank, like on their own, and you say, "Oh, write a paragraph about this," or you write a sentence about this, or write a word about this. So it doesn't matter how, what age your child is writing at. The process and the modeling still needs to be there.
Absolutely right, and that it's infectious. So in the section of the book that we read and we're going to talk about, Maria herself has several of these aha moments when she sees the children modeling how she is modeling for the children and how they're replicating that and thinking through it. She's observing this early on. Yeah. We know now through neuroscience that these are actually true things that actually happen in the brain. It's not just hearsay. And as educators, we see it day to day. So to Aubrey's point, if you want your child to write and enjoy writing, you need to write with them. Now, sometimes they'll have a natural inclination.
Sometimes, yeah. I certainly did when I was a child. I just wrote constantly. I read constantly. I wrote constantly. I talked to a mama this morning on Instagram. She DM'd me and she was like, she's in our lower elementary course. And she's like, "Aubrey, I'm having such a hard time like following through with my child. All she wants to do is read." And I was like, "Yes, I understand that. I totally understand that." And she says, "But no, you don't understand. All she wants to do is read. She doesn't want to do any activities or follow up things to what she's learning." And what I told her, I said, "You know what? First of all, this is a gift that you're giving your child. You're giving a gift to allow your child to do the thing that they love the most. This is going to be true with anything that your child loves." Our oldest, it wasn't like it was reading also for our oldest, but it was also science. Like, it was super into those snap circuits.
Totally. There was no amount of
cardboard.
Yeah, there was no modeling or parallel work or together work that was needed get him excited about it. He would just go occupy himself forever.
But that wasn't true for all subjects.
No, definitely not.
Yeah.
And not true for either of our children. So it really does vary, right? So as humans, we have certain things through our life that will fascinate us. We'll get really into it and we'll want to study it. It kind of captivates us. But as the parent educators, we have a responsibility to make sure that they have a robust diet of academic things. And so that's where the coming together helps. So let's say that the child doesn't have a natural inclination. I loved writing when I was a kid. I wrote short stories by the time. They were all terrible. But I loved writing. I just sit and write and write when in high school. So nobody had to parallel, do that for me. I just couldn't stop. But that's not true for everybody. Certainly not necessarily true for, at least at this point, for our kids. And so for them, we really do have to construct it and we have to work with them and help them along. And that's okay. That's kind of what it's all about. And if you enjoy it, then they'll enjoy it too.
Yeah. So what I said to this mama was, if your child is reading and enjoying, that could just be enough. It's okay to allow your child, if they're really immersed, they have often children who really love to read have super vivid, vibrant imaginations. And so maybe they're already playing out those things in their head. And it's kind of like they are doing it, in their minds, even though there's no physical, tangible product. But that being said, it's so healthy for us to model for our children, and it makes us feel part of the process, and it really, really helps them learn as well, even if they're not doing the actual activity. So even if you are just the one writing in your book, maybe for several months, you're the one writing, they just see you doing it all the time, then they're going to be much more inclined to do it themselves.
That's right.
So we always do writing together. And I think that this is one of the things that actually kind of makes homeschooling a little bit different than classroom teaching too. Because in the classroom, you're used to coming up with a lesson, you present the lesson, and then you come up with an activity for the children to do after the lesson, and then maybe some kind of follow-up writing
That's right.
assignments or project for them to work on. And generally this works because you've given them the lesson, there's expectation is there, you're in this closed environment where all the children are supposed to be like working on this project thing. It's very, very clear that you are the teacher, they are the student, and their job there is to like be doing the work that you give them. Like, that's just how school is. But at home, relationship is so different. Like, you
Totally.
don't have that set up. And so, you know, in a school classroom, maybe your children are watching other kids doing that work and they're like, oh yeah, I'm supposed to be writing too, because I see other kids writing in their draft book, and so I'll write in my draft book. But at home, if there's not just like a group of other people around you all writing in their draft books, you have to be the one to do that kind of modeling for your child.
Yeah, and the one thing I would underscore here, because this can get really scary, we get this question a lot: how much time should I spend? How do I cover all this stuff?
Yeah.
You know, a minute ago I said make sure they have a rich, you know, academic diet. Like, if the child only wants to read, is that a problem? And I think we often hold ourselves up to the standard that we see in our traditional schools, where the kid goes for 7, 8, 9 hours sometimes. And what I want to make sure people understand is that school is not 7, 8, or 9 hours because it has to be. It's that way because it makes best sense for the way schools are structured. There's a lot of non-work time in schools, passing periods, sitting around, board time. You're trying to aim for the broad, you know, group. So if you're thinking like, well, how am I going to actually parallel or work or write with my child for 7 hours a day? You're not. You're going to do it for whatever the right amount of time is, maybe 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and maybe depending on the age of the child, you know, some combination of independent writing and then together writing, because it doesn't require the 7 hours. What it needs is the right attention and focus on the right things, and to build that into your everyday life. So you can homeschool and not miss something important. You really can do it.
Yeah, you really can. So many people ask, can I? And the answer is yes. You know, you're not going to walk your child through a checklist of things. There's a whole world to explore. And, you know, if you get some really good rhythm and routines, like you just choose one technique that really, really want to work with for a while, like a draft book, then you're just going to branch off from there. And it's just going to feel more and more intuitive as you go. So we've talked about a lot of the concepts that we actually talk about in our foundation courses.
That's right.
The Homeschool the Redwoods primary and lower elementary. I would recommend a rhythm for your child for writing, for reading as well, but writing, it's just one of those things that children will blossom into when they're ready. As Maria Montessori found out
right.
when she talked about the explosion of writing using the specific materials that she was exploring.
Exactly. So it's really knowing the right things. And as Maria discovers, it's about getting out of the way of the child and letting their natural ability, curiosity, that innate skill come to life. And that's why when we developed our programs, our foundational programs on homeschooling, it really is focused on what is a small but specific number of things to learn, rather than a huge compendium that you might find like thousands and thousands of lessons. Because the fact is, it's overwhelming. You don't really need it. A lot of it was designed for traditional school settings, which have much different rules and requirements and purposes. And so we're actually starting, for those of you who are interested in learning more about this, we're actually going to be starting lower L again. So if you have a 6 to 9 year old or a kid who is going to be turning 6 over the next 6 months, 9 months, and you're interested in learning what those core concepts are and how to do that, you might want to go check out our lower elementary program, which is enrolling starting in May. We have information and some samples on our website. You're just finishing up the current session.
Yeah, actually, both the primary and the lower elementary courses are kind of wrapping up at this point. Primary is pretty much done for me doing lives, but members are still in our community chatting and working through that material. We give a long time to let things simmer and to let people work through at a self-pace, because things come up during a course. They always do. People have babies, we get distracted. Like, it doesn't always work out in the exact.
Well, it's not just
so.
children who get interested or something becomes
Yeah.
relevant or irrelevant. It's true for all learners, and so we've structured these programs to really try and accommodate that. That's why you get lifetime access to the core material, because we want it to be there when you're ready for it.
Yeah, and so things are kind of just simmering and lingering, and we're getting a lot of great questions in the community. It's feeling really good. So that's like the foundation. But we also talk a lot about how to make homeschooling work in practice. And
That's right.
I'm not going to go too deep into this right now because I really want to get to part 2 of the child as a teacher, but I really wanted David to show you these bird to feather matching cards that we really just made for constellation because they're so pretty.
Well, thanks.
And I'm really proud of them.
Yeah, I mean, so this month our theme for constellation is fly, and so birds fly, airplanes fly. We have all kinds of stuff. There's 10 different activities and about 20 different books and other things, pacing guide, all that stuff, plus the community and the coaching. But one of the things that we did is a matching, and we think it's a little bit different. It's a matching activity of birds. So we selected the birds. Let's see if I can make this show up.
Yeah.
And then we did original, we then did some original art. We created the artwork here. And they're really neat. Well, thanks. So we have 6 different birds. This is just one of the different activities. Here's our barn owl. And it's a great gateway, right? We've talked about before the idea that in Montessori, it's a spiraling approach. And so, for a little one, it may just be looking at the pictures and thinking about what do these what do these birds do for
Isn't it this one?
Yeah, for a primary, it might be about the actual matching and looking at how do you know that this feather goes with this barn owl. And there's a key for you if you need it. For older kids, it's also about, or even younger kids too, bringing in objects. So you would extend this activity if you have a feather, and then studying the feather, weighing the feather, looking at the qualities, trying to think about the way the feather, the colors of the feather, going out. It actually
just occurred to me that these two look really
They
similar.
Are. It's not an owl feather. I think it's a hawk.
I think that this is a hawk. We've actually found this on a hike.
Yeah, and that's a great thing to do. Go out, if you find a feather, can you figure out what bird lives in your area that feather came from? A kid who loves to read, let them read as many books as they can or want to about birds or anything related to birds. Fiction, nonfiction, poetry, it doesn't really matter. It's just a great gateway. Another thing that we have in this is a 4-part card where we have different kinds of flying machines. So we have let's see if I can get this to work. An airship. So we have the control card. We have the.
It'll focus on you.
Oh well, the picture card. So I'll do this.
Just letting you know.
The picture, and then the 4th part for those who are reading. So this is another example of. So if your children are at different ages, these activities again can spiral, and it could be as basic as looking at the picture, thinking about it, describing it, to doing the matching, to doing the 4-part, to then researching further and looking up, well, what is an airship? What is the history of the airship, or whatever? It's just a lot of fun, right? So this is another example of where this is what it means to learn with your child. You'd want to, maybe you're not interested in the airships, but you are interested in the birds. Great. If you're interested in the birds, your children will get interested in the birds. Do the activity together, think about it, read books, watch shows, go on walks, look at the birds, take pictures. Whatever it is, it's all helpful, because what you're studying, if you want to kind of figure out where that flies, it's going to be life science, it's going to be physical science, it's going to be geography under humankind, it could be poetry, it could be, if you start reading poems or other things about it. So it's going to be the arts, all sorts of fun stuff. It could even be challenging an older child to create their own feathers. And using these pictures that we try to create in a way that were simple enough to recreate, and saying, hey, go do your own. And that can be a lot of fun too.
It can, and it's healthy for your children to see you create these materials. So, if creativity with materials is your thing and you love creating your own parts cards, I heartily recommend that. But the truth is that most of the parents that we talk to just don't have time to put together something like this. And so that's where Constellation comes in.
Yep.
And the thing is, we really love putting together these materials. And so we find it really exciting.
We do.
I have a master's in curriculum and instruction. Like, I just love perusing curriculum. I love creating materials. And when I came up with the concept of the bird to feather matching activity, we talked for a long time about whether it was actually possible to do it, because we knew that, if you go online and you can find parts cards and you can find Montessori activities just out the wazoo. But the thing is, most of them actually aren't created with the Montessori principles in mind, like the actual Montessori philosophy at heart in it. People will just take photos off the internet and kind of put it together, and anybody can do it. But something that we really love is being serious about the pedagogy behind it. And so we knew that we would be able to find some pictures on the internet that we could legally use of feathers and pictures of birds.
An owl picture,
but we wanted to make sure that the sizes were exactly consistent.
The colors matched, the clarity,
matched,
isolation of quality.
And so what that meant was that David had to draw them all himself, and sometimes we can use, pictures that we find, and David can edit them and we can make them into cards, and they're realistic, and that's great. But when it comes to something like a bird to feather matching activity, we wanted it to really be exact. And so I had to ask David if we could make this, if this was going to be possible. I was like, I know it's going to take you a long time to draw these birds. Like, do you want to do that work? And so if you are an artist and you love watercoloring, or you love painting or drawing, and that's your thing, draw your own cards, it's so fulfilling to be able to create these kind of materials. And then you just feel so good when you get to share them with your children. I certainly created a lot of materials when I was a classroom teacher, but when I was a mama, I just was really short on time. And so there was just no way I could create so many of them. So we just love being able to give this
fun
gift
for
to
us,
you.
and hopefully it's helpful to those who are using it. Well, let's move on. Let's talk about the book.
Let's do it. All right. So we are in The Child is the Teacher, Part 2, and it's actually not a very big section. You can tell us in the chat. Thank you, Lena. You can tell us in the chat if you have read the book or not. Okay. We're happy to give you a little summary, but tell us what you thought if you are here live with us. If you're listening to the recording, just listen along, and then you're always welcome to
come back next time.
Come back next time, or email us with your thoughts too. We're available at hello@childoftheredwoods.com. That'll reach both me, David, and Carrie. Okay. So where are we? So let's see. So where we left off in part 1, Maria had a baby, and that baby was in secret, right? Nobody knew about this baby. And then she, she refuses to get married because she's an independent feminist in her time, and she really, really wanted to have this career, and she knew that she couldn't have it if she got married and had children and settled down and did the wife thing. And it seemed like she was in an authentically romantic relationship with her lover. It seems like he really loved her.
Giuseppe, right?
Yeah, and he would have married her, but he also respected her. And he respected her decision not to get married. And so for a while, they had this little secret pact, like we won't get married. We'll have this baby in secret, and we love each other, and we're just going to be two unmarried people who secretly have this relationship with each other. But it didn't work out for Giuseppe.
No, it didn't.
Yeah, Maria was like, fine, this is exactly what I want. I get to have my career, be a strong woman, have the baby, raising him in secret, until times change and I can have my cake and eat it too. But for Giuseppe, it's kind of like his family was pressuring him to get married and settle down and have babies. I'm sure they wanted grandchildren to love and be part of the family. And so he was under a lot of pressure for that. And eventually he married somebody else, and Maria's heart was broken.
Totally.
And that is kind of where we left off. Maria kind of they had worked together to create the Orthophrenic School of Rome, I think it was called the League of Mentally ill children or some mentally deficient children, something like that. The League for the Protection of Mentally Deficient Children is something that they had both worked on together. And she abandons that. She says, oh, he doesn't love me anymore. My heart is broken. He's cut off. All right. He's dead to me. And she cuts off everything that she has done with him.
That's right. I mean, she's obviously, if not at the very least, an equal partner, and probably the kind of the brains behind a lot of the work at the school. And so it's no small thing, but I think it highlights something we're going to see in this section as well, which is that Maria is very, very, very aware of her public image.
Mm-hmm.
And as much as she is a radical, a feminist, a socialist, whatever different labels she would put onto herself, it was always up to a line that she wasn't quite ready to cross. So she could have married Giuseppe and had Mario, the baby, and gone off and lived a bohemian life. But she couldn't have done that and been famous and respected in society and had prestige. And so she had to make a choice. And kind of when push comes to shove, she often will choose, as in that case, and again, in this section, as she's struggling with her faith, she'll choose to keep certain things secret that may affect how people perceive her. And so, it's something interesting about her. Is it a cowardice of conscience? Is it, practical acceptance? Is it something else? It's very difficult to kind of think through. We really put Maria on the shelf, as we do a lot of really wonderful, famous, brilliant people. We tend to, put them on a shelf, a pedestal, I should say, and idealize them. And there's things that she is a human, as we all are, and her humanness is a liability at times, as it is for us all. So that's the conclusion of the first section, and then we're into the second section. She's trying to figure out what to do next.
Yeah, she's trying to figure out what to do next, but first she has to heal her heart because she's really, really hurting. She's just at this point where she just is missing her baby. She's missing her love.
She'll go and watch the baby from a distance.
Yeah,
it's very sad.
It's so sad. She can sneak over there sometime and just kind of watch him as he plays in the yard, but she has no legal rights over him, no ability to announce herself as his mom. And whether it's because it's her own, this was her decision, but it's also super, super sad. So she does what a lot of people do when they're in a terrible crisis and their heart is hurting and they need healing. We just think, where do you go for healing in this world? Many, many people go to church to heal their heart. And so she turns to God. She turns to her faith. She has grown up in a Catholic world, in her society is predominantly Catholic, but her parents aren't necessarily super religious people.
Nor are many of the people that she associates with in the intellectual intelligentsia. All right, these academicians and others, they I think in a way disdain the church and the sort of the power of the Catholic Church over society. And this is sort of becomes an intense conflict. So she does find comfort and solace and becomes deeply devout, though, always tenacious, right? She's always very certain about what she believes, even if it contradicts mainstream teaching, Catholic teaching. She has her beliefs. She's very strong, but she's also very, very devout, but it's a complete secret. She never, at least through this section, she doesn't share this because I think she knows it would be ostracizing for her. It would be one of those moments again where her public image would be tarnished if she were seen as, devoutly Catholic in a time where, like I said, the intelligentsia, the academicians, the people that she sees as her peers, they have some, open disdain for it.
So what does she do? So she really immerses herself in her work. She dedicates herself to her research. She's researching, she's publishing, she's lecturing. She continues her feminist work that we talked about in part one about rights for women and organizing groups of women to get together to speak up on behalf of children's needs. And So, while she's doing this, she's really trying to become well known and to be respected in her field. But also, even though when she was a little girl and she said, I don't want to be a teacher, she finds herself really being drawn back in over and over into working with children. Just her heart is just like, children need more than what they're getting in her current society. And I think that there's something about the fact that she had to give up her child that makes her even more just devoted to all of the children who she sees that are just suffering in these various conditions, whether it's being put in an asylum for a mental instability or a disease.
Juvenile hall that she works in,
yes.
And a prison,
basically, yeah.
Which is just a as it describes in the book, as is not uncommon even today. The prison is just basically a collecting place for children who have mental disorders, behavioral disorders, things that were not understood or accepted or studied, plus kids who had got in trouble for things that really aren't their problem, like those who have been forced into prostitution, things like that, and kids who had committed actual crimes are all sort of mixed together, and she's kind of seeing this issue, right? Remember, she's in a time where the growth of the middle class, this is the second industrial revolution. There's this growth of cities. She's a part of that. She's seeing it in her background. She had that feminist ideology. She obviously believed in that. She was a socialist at the time, but it's within this experience of seeing these examples of children suffering and the mistreatment of children, and perhaps her own experiences as a mother. And
I don't have any doubt.
It's not said in the
no doubt.
Yeah, sure. It's not textually based, but I think that's probably true, right? Like, you can't help but imagine that this influences her in some way, probably very profoundly. But these things kind of come together, and she starts to kind of lose emphasis on the other components, sort of the feminism and the socialism. The speaking in those areas become less pronounced, and it really focuses more and more on pedagogy. She sees that through education, pedagogy, helping children, you can help humans. You can help lift up different social classes. You can help the plight of women. You can help society more wholly. So she sees like this is the solution. And this time is like born of, it becomes two things: her faith, her Catholic faith, and her belief in pedagogy. And they begin to merge in a really, really profound way that forms the Maria that we know. The Maria who views education like with a religious fervor, who sees teachers as missionaries, who speaks with an almost, what's the right, like a homily. It's almost, there's something about, I don't want to say cult-like devotion.
No. I can tell you that when I read this book, I really identified with it, because it was obvious to me that the author had really met enough Montessori guides to understand this. It is sometimes referred to as a cult out and about. I've always lovingly referred to it as my cult, just the cult of Maria Montessori, because Montessori, this here, the next section, we're going to get into talking about her devotees, her acolytes, basically, her devoted followers, of which, I am 100%, as reading this book, I was like, oh, that is like 100% me, even today, continuing on this tradition. And it is almost like a very spiritual journey. You have to look at the child with the kind of love that you would feel for God. And that was revolutionary at the time. And I think it is still revolutionary today. It's the difference in the Montessori method is not in the materials. It's in the complete 100% reverence and devotion that the guides have, not for Maria Montessori, although she is, love her, but it is to the child. So to really be a Montessorian, you have to have that deep, intense love and devotion of children on that deep spiritual level as well. And that really is the difference. When you walk into a traditional classroom and you see the teacher up at the front chatting or maybe talking over the children or kind of announcing themselves as like the biggest person in the room and the biggest personality, you get the feeling of, well, oh, this person really loves to be with children or really loves their job or really loves teaching. But it's different when you walk into a Montessori classroom, and if it's a really good Montessori classroom, because not all Montessori schools are good. Let's be honest. They're just schools. We are all humans, okay? Not every human has this kind of deep devotion. But if you walk into a Montessori classroom and it feels reverent and the guide is just respectful, like beyond just general courtesies, but like you can see in their eyes just this deep, devoted respect to the child, and just that love shining through them, that is what Maria created, and so, and that's the origin of that. And it's really hard for me to describe to people. I mean, you had no idea when we met. You were like, oh, Montessori, I think I've heard of that. Or
sure, I'm familiar with the concept.
Right, basically. Or maybe you think of Montessori and you're like, oh yeah, the pink tower, or oh yeah, that method, or oh yeah, Montessori, the shelfies. These days on Instagram, it's like, oh yeah, the shelfies and the little routine cards, and or you think of the parts cards, right? You're like, oh yeah, Montessori. Yeah. But Montessori, real Montessori, is about devotion. And so in order to do Montessori, you have to become almost like a spiritual guide for the child. And that means you have to do a lot of inner spiritual guidance and work yourself. Yeah, that's right. And so it's hard. It's not a journey that is easy to like mass produce in the public. People are always like, why did Montessori take off public education? I mean, sure, we can make parts cards more well known. We can distribute bird to feather materials.
We're proud of these things, but they're not. But this isn't Montessori. It's just a picture of a bird that we happily drew. It's that we think is aligned to conducive to the
with
method,
the pedagogy,
with the pedagogy in mind. But it's something more spiritual. I think it was a question for you. So, I wonder what Maria's work would have been like if she had not connected at that spiritual level. Because, when we, as a scientist, she was trained to observe. Mm-hmm. She was studying to be an anthropology professor during her sort of time in the wilderness after the school fell apart and the relationship fell apart, and she's not sure what to do. And she's learning to observe and study. The author writes at one point that she dreams of a new anthropology allied with pedagogy, which does not limit itself to measuring the bodies of students in a certain sense, sanctioning intellectual and social inequities, but works to eliminate them. So she has a scientific eye and a belief in through this science you can uplift. But I think there's something beyond that. She also has a sense of patience for revealed knowledge that I feel like must have been influenced by her Catholicism. The idea of a leap of faith, the idea of something that, within the spark within, the divine within, or whatever you want to say, that isn't always revealed, but you have to have faith that it's in there. Like, for example, that a child can learn to read even without being given all the specific things. Like they have within them a spark of the divine.
Or the child that's real time and just won't do anything but read.
Right.
It's the faith that they will get what they need out of it, that they're doing it for a divine reason, not just that they're doing it just because they're bored or they have nothing else to do, but that they're doing it.
Yeah, there's something beyond, right?
In that spiritual way, like that there is something in them. There is something in that larger spirituality that's like already in the seed of the child that commands them to read all the time, okay? Or commands them to obsessively want to play with paper and tape and scissors, okay? There's just like something in the child that is motivating them to do that. And so what is our job as the guides? Like, what does Maria Montessori say to us to do? And I can tell you, as a trained guide, what she tells us to do is to have faith.
Faith in the child.
Faith in the child and faith in the process.
Right.
Faith in the method. And not her specific method or the materials, but faith in that the development of the child will reveal itself in time.
Exactly. And so again, I hadn't thought really about this until we're talking right now, but I do wonder how that spiritual experience shaped her. Like she would have had the observation, the scientific training. She would have taken that to San Lorenzo, where she does her groundbreaking work that becomes the foundation of all that we really think about with Montessori, the Children's House. But I don't know that it would have had the same sparkle or the same resonance, because it's something more than just I'm going to observe the child. It's something about I'm going to observe the child because I know that through that will be revealed something true.
Yes.
And it's interesting. I think the other piece on this that I'm curious about, like, for there's many different practitioners of Montessori, many of whom are not Catholic or religious at all. Do you feel in your experience that there's ever a difficulty in connecting to the Montessori method if you have not another kind of faith tradition or no faith tradition at all?
Yeah, well, this is a spoiler alert for later on in the book, which I know you haven't read yet. But Maria does go to India in the later part of her life, and I think that she learns a lot from experiencing firsthand an Eastern philosophy of spirituality as well. And so by the time you get to a book like The Absorbent Mind, which she writes in India as the culmination, like of her actual method, you can read her earlier work, but The Absorbent Mind is like where really that spirituality and that reverence for the child, the practicality, they all come together. So I think that she herself started with Catholicism, and there are many Catholics today certainly who read her work and they resonate very deeply with it. But in my experience, I have found that because Maria herself broadened this spirituality to encompass all things, to encompass more of like all humanity together, and she focused so much on that I think it really resonates with anybody of any religion or no religion.
Yeah, absolutely. So sometimes we get that question, and I do think that it resonates really well for the faithful, but we certainly know very well many people who are not practitioners or religious or at all.
Sure, and you don't have to be. You don't have to be religious in order to have spirituality.
Exactly.
Like Maria Montessori believed everybody had spirituality already. It's like something that we are born with. We all share.
That's right, and I think that goes also to kind of her contrarian opinion. Like she's not. As is revealed in the book, she's willing to fight. Like she wants an audience with the Pope. She doesn't get it. So she obviously wants that connection. She believes, she's very devout, and yet she keeps it a secret. She goes against Jesuit teaching. She'll fight openly with people. She'll openly disdain some parts of Catholicism or Catholicism in her society if she thinks it's not helpful. So she's not.
Many people don't know.
Yeah,
who discovered Montessori don't know that she believed in evolution heartily,
which isn't counter to Catholic, mainstream Catholic teaching.
Right.
So, she's a scientist too. So.
Yes.
But we do get that question, like, do I have to teach evolution or so forth? And I think again, the point would be that you would want to try and connect to the spiritual piece within yourself and within the child. And however your faith or your spirituality expresses itself, there's room for you in Montessori.
Yeah.
For her particular story, I think it's interesting how the combination of Catholicism, this emotional crisis that then sparked a sort of a spiritual awakening, coupled with this opportunity in San Lorenzo, where she's looking for something new, meld together to create Maria that we know. It's a fascinating moment.
It is. Sabina says, I've turned into a Montessori advocate when I see some institutions use the name so freely. Yes, you are carrying on the legacy. Thank you for being part of the cult. But seriously, so we haven't actually talked about what San Lorenzo is, and there may be some people who don't know.
That's right.
So I'd like to kind of go through that. So Maria was basically kind of contracted, and it's been a few weeks since I've read part 2. So correct me if I'm wrong, but she was essentially contracted to work with this group of children who are basically kind of running amok in this slum, this little, basically, I think it was like a housing project.
It's essentially a housing project in a very poor part of
of Rome. Yeah. And so she was supposed to go in there, and they kind of gifted her like this, okay, Maria, here's a grant. Here's some bunch of children, go see what you can do. And so she was given complete free range to do whatever she wanted.
It was her requirement, because there was a lot of people who did not think it was appropriate for her to take the post. She had worked very hard at this point, gone back to school again, was going to become an anthropology professor, and again, resuming kind of some part of her old kind of trajectory. And here's this opportunity to go and basically create and run this school for kids who otherwise I think essentially just been roaming free, like little kids who didn't have anywhere to go. They weren't in school because they were too young. Their parents were at work. They were just basically roaming and causing mischief. They wanted to create a place to stick them. And they're like, what are we going to do? They asked Montessori to come and head it up. And she had to debate that. And she actually goes to a nun and asks for spiritual guidance. This is, again, an example of how important that is for her. And then decides, like, this is her work. And so it becomes a calling. And that calling is, I'll go to San Lorenzo, take these kids who are now in this room and figure out what to do. And they're going to give me free reign, even though it's going to potentially derail my career. It's a setback. It's a step down in some ways. I'm willing to do it because I feel called to do it.
Yeah, so this is the very first Montessori school that was ever in creation, created by her. It was called the Casa dei Bambini, the House of Children. So
it was called that because everything was tiny, right?
Yeah. Well, everything belonged to the children.
That's right.
Yeah, everything belonged to the children. So if you are driving along and you might see signs that say, something Montessori school, but occasionally you'll see House of Children, like the House of Children of a city or something. And that's why it's a Casa dei Bambini in honor of that very, very first school. And so I think that is something just truly lovely when I come across it. But at this little school, what she does is she doesn't teach them all herself. She is the director of the program. And so she is primarily putting herself in the role of like the observer, the researcher, and so she gets her notebook, which probably looks more professional than this, and opens it up, and she just is like taking notes, and she's documenting, and she documents all kinds of things that you wouldn't think to do today in school. She weighs the children every day. She measures their height routinely, on schedule, and their circumference of their head, and just like all their body measure, how long their arms are, everything.
Because she's pulling from that anthropology.
Yeah. And so she studies their bodies first, and then she also studies their behavior. And so she's getting more and more interested in psychology just as a field. And she's studying their behavior and seeing what they do. And she wants to know what interests them. And she creates this environment where she puts all of Seguin's materials essentially into these cabinets. All the materials that she and Giuseppe had been working with together in these little sample research areas that she was working with these mentally deficient children. And now she's working with normal children who are essentially just poor, not deficient in mind or, physically handicapped or anything. And so here she is with normal children, and she opens up these materials just to see what will happen. Like, will the magic of what happened in the orthophrenic school, in the other situations she's worked in, also happen in this school with children who are of sound mind?
And she's been curious about this for a while. Will Seguin's method work for others? She
wants to know. So she puts them all into cabinets, and they're all locked away in these little cabinets. Every morning, the assistant comes into the room, unlocks all of the cabinets, gets out the materials and sets them around the room, and the children come and work on them. But they cannot touch the materials right away. Maria is really serious about this because they're filthy. Not the materials, the children. Children are filthy. They are not being cared for enough. Their parents are exhausted. Many of their parents are working long, long hours. These children are primarily not supervised. Their older siblings are all in school. And the under sixes, they're all just running, terrorizing everybody through this complex, totally unsupervised, and you can just imagine the kind of madness that it was before she stepped in. So here she is, and she's like, I'm going to measure them, and now I'm going to see how clean they are, and they're filthy, and we got to do something about that. So she puts these little wash basins in.
There's
and
toilets.
Toilets. She teaches them how to bathe themselves, and she even teaches them how to bathe each other, which, makes me wonder, like, coming from that spiritual aspect, if there was a little of something in that too, the compassion and the kindness that is taught by washing another person. Those children were actually doing it. And this is not necessarily something that you would see in a classroom today, a bunch of children bathing each other, but it is how the method began, a very visceral, personal, physical, body oriented way.
That's a very interesting observation, like a Lenten observance type of experience. Well, for these children, they were amazed. They had never, for many reasons. One is that they were being treated with a kind of respect and love that was kind of unusual. There's also just sort of like access to indoor plumbing. I mean, they live in tenements. These are really bad conditions, and that it wasn't all that long ago that you found in Rome, and unfortunately find in too many parts of our world today. So these children they're kids that are kind of overlooked. No one cares. They're too little to go to school. They're too old to be cared for by mom or granny or whomever what might be around. They're off working. They're having to go off of work. So what's to be done? And suddenly they're given this attention, and they're taught these things, and they thrive.
They love it. They love it so much. They're so grateful. And in fact, Maria had a lot of support. She had a lot of toys that were donated by the wealthy women who were in her area, kept donating their toys, a lot like we do today. With the more privileged will donate their toys. But what Maria found was that what was more interesting to the children was the materials themselves. She said the children would see the doll and they might play with it for a little while, but then they would become fascinated by the red rods or the pink tower, which was at that time probably not even pink, but they would be fascinated by these materials and they would just want to play with them. And so Maria just sat there and observed, watched these children, and she wanted to know which of the materials were they most drawn to, which one were they the least drawn to, and if one could make subtle little adjustments to the materials, would the children then go to them more often? So she's just very curious and wondering constantly about what she could do in that environment for the children, and what she could just make available for them that they maybe had never experienced before, that satiated a need. So she really did start with Seguin's materials and use them, and we still use many of them today in Montessori circles. But she also added, she was like, if children can focus their attention and we can isolate the quality of the visual aspect with these materials, could we do it also with sound? Or could we do it also with a weight? Or could we do it with these other types of sensory engagements?
Yeah, there were a couple of things. One is, going to that sort of the pain that, she was experiencing prior to this. She's reading in the paper about, all of her old works, her materials from the orthophrenic school. It says in the book that they burned them. I don't know if that's literally true, but she certainly probably feels that way, that they actually just destroyed all of her actual materials. So she has to have them remade, and she's very, very exacting. She goes to artisans and craftsmen, craftsmen, and says, I want this, and they'll say, well, we can just make that out of cardboard, and she'll say, no.
Got to make it out of wood.
Here's how it's going to be, and then she'll get the guy excited or whatever, and he'll go off and do it. And so part of it
she just did it with little sketches. They said she couldn't even really draw very well. Like, she just would kind of sketch in her little notebook, and she would say, it has to be these measurements. She kind of sketch it out, and then they would have to figure out what Maria wanted, and they would kind of debate with each other. Did she want it like this? No, I think she wanted it like this. And then they would create the thing, and Maria would come in and take it and say, yes, this is right, or no, this is not what I wanted.
She's very, very exacting. And I think there's some spark of innovation that's happening there, right? Because she had found and worked from the original materials, and then they're destroyed, or she loses access to them, and for however that means. And so she has to recreate them, and she's recreating them in part from memory, is the kind of my sense.
And before she has woodworkers, she is doing it at home herself.
She does make some of these things,
and her assistant helps in the
creation. And I think it's through that she's starting to innovate. The other is that she finds very quickly that actually all children, regardless, benefit from the use of these materials. It happens in a different way for different types of children. And there are things that for the children she's working with now at San Lorenzo, it's they get the concept very fast. Whereas Sagin might have had to sit with the child on his lap and working on eye contact for a whole day, she doesn't have to do that with these children. They don't have those needs, and so they can jump more quickly right into the activity. But it does not diminish the value of the activity at all. In fact, it just makes it faster for them to get into the meat of it.
Yeah. So one of her personal aha moments that is in this book that I would like to share with you is she's observing these children, and something strikes her as this big epiphany. She notices the concentration of the children, and I'm thinking back to that moment where she was in the anatomy class,
Yeah.
and she went up walking on the hill. Do you remember how she went and she noticed the child who was poor, a beggar child who was just like
fascinated with the red
fascinating
ribbon,
with the red ribbon. Yeah, I was just like playing with it, fascinated, absorbed in it, didn't seem to be aware of anything that was going on around him. And so she notices more clearly that same thing happening in her own classroom. And so here's one example. I'm going to read to you from page 102 in the chapter called The Immense Work. Maria is an extraordinary observer. She watches the children for hours, recording every detail. From the very first day, she is struck by how intensely they work with the learning materials. The normal child, attracted by the object, intensely fixed all of his attention on it and kept on working and working without pause, with marvelous concentration. She devotes a lot of time to studying this behavior. She realizes that children traditionally thought to be agitated and voluble demonstrate a capacity for attention far superior to that of adults. They concentrate on every step, repeat every exercise until they are completely satisfied. And when they work this way, nothing can distract them. And here's the example. She says one episode in particular strikes her as an epiphany. One day she sees a little girl of 3 working with a pegboard, placing and replacing the little pegs in their holes. She looks deeply absorbed, as though nothing could get her attention. Maria takes the little chair the girl is sitting on and puts it on top of a little table. But the girl grabs the pegboard, puts it on her knees, and keeps working on it up there on the table. Can you imagine doing this with a real child? Maria was not afraid to do this kind of weird stuff in the classroom that you probably would never see a Montessori guy do today. Then Maria asked the other children to sing and dance in a circle around the table. Once again, the little girl gives no sign of hearing or seeing anything. She goes on sticking the pegs in their holes again and again. 44 times, Maria counts, and then she suddenly stops working and looks up, finally taking a look around her. It's as though something had happened inside her. But what? So just imagine the scene, the little girl with the pegboard. You can just imagine like a child of 3. I think that this, I can imagine that maybe your 5-year-old would look up at you and say like, what are you doing? Stop, go away, and kind of be a little bit violent with you if this was going on. But a child of like 2.5 or 3, it's so easy to see how just they're just so completely in the zone when they're doing it. You can just move their little bodies around. Maybe you even had this experience. Maybe your child was interested in playing with a toy, but it was time to go. So you just picked your child up, they brought their toy with them, and then you put them in the car seat. They're still playing with the toy. You buckle them up, and then you get in the car and drive away. Have you ever had that experience before? I know we did many times. Our children love to play with toys in the car. And so that was one example that would be very much like that Maria did. But it can happen, friends, that children can become that absorbed in their work if you step back and you just give them the freedom to have that concentration, allow it to develop, make sure that the environment is not too stimulating or distracting. But when children are really absorbed in concentrating on an activity of their choosing, they can just be zoned into it.
That's right.
And the author of this book even mentions that today, we have a new term for that concentration, that zoning in, and there's actually a whole book about it if you want to read it. It is called flow, and the concept is called flow. And I can never pronounce the name of this author, even though I know I should remember it. So I wrote down the pronunciation. It's Mohaili Csikszentmihalyi. It's a total butchering of this poor person's name, but it's a fantastic book. So if you're interested in going deeper into that academic side of it, and you want to nurture that part of your mind as that homeschooling parent, then look up the concept of flow. This deep concentration and total devotion to an activity of one's own choosing is still something that we are researching and discovering.
Well, now we know through neuroscience that these things they're not just observed behavioral coincidental things. They're in the brain. We can look inside the brain now with our technology and know that these things are true. Like, she used observational science of her time to identify something that we've now verified with modern science. And she did that partly because she was a brilliant scientist, and also, I think, in no small part because she had faith and willingness to learn. She was reflecting on all those experiences, and there was something inside her that said children are mistreated in our society in a really significant way. In the book, there's a scene where she says something like, "We expect children to sit still while strangers come up and kiss them, or say, give your uncle a kiss or whatever. And if you did that to the mother, she would be incensed and smack him in the face." It's absolutely right. We treat children differently than we treat adults, and that's in part, for their safety or other things. But sometimes it's just because we underestimate the emotional depth or capacity of the child, and that's what she's trying to avoid. And again, not just because she's a scientist, but because she has this faith in the spark within.
So the last thing we're going to talk about today, before we go, because we're kind of coming up on time, is the explosion into writing and reading. So in our traditional here and now society, we often talk about reading and writing. But really, Maria said we should be talking about writing and reading. And so that's the way, if you're in our primary course, if you've taken that, you already know that is the way we teach. We teach writing first, and then we teach reading. And Maria discovered this with the sandpaper letters way back then. She used the sandpaper letters with these special children in the Casa dei Bambini.
Yeah.
So
right.
The same sandpaper letters that we still create today, and I know many of you have done a DIY approach to them. I've seen some really beautiful versions recently that parents have been working on. But Maria herself, she actually DIY'd her own first set of sandpaper letters herself at home. So your set is no better or worse than Maria's set that you might be DIYing at home.
It's one of those happy accidents. She had lost the Seguin version. She couldn't easily recreate them. She didn't have enough money to do it. And so she DIYs because sandpaper was cheap. And she makes an aha. And I just real quick, I want to read this.
Sure.
She's writing back about this. She says, we want the old, meaning like the way that she's sort of reflecting on these, making those letters. She says, we want the old because we cannot know the new. And we always look for the grandiosity, which lies in things that are already passé, without recognizing in the humble simplicity of new beginnings, the germ that will have to develop in the future. Mm-hmm. In other words, she's saying, because I didn't have, and she says this, because I didn't have enough money to build these, I had to make them simply. And I had to innovate on what Seguin had done and others had done as a necessity. But from that came this marvelous innovation. And that too often we're afraid of the new, and we're afraid of the faith that comes in trying to make that happen. Like, we have try the new thing and really give it time. And that philosophy really guides her through a huge amount of her life and work. And this moment is such a wonderful expression of that.
Yes. I think anytime you do something with your hands.
I don't know why you keep putting the book away.
Sorry. Okay, we'll open it back up for you. I think anytime you do something with your hands, it really connects you to the material and you're much more invested in it. So Lena, yay for making those DIY sandpaper letters. If you don't have time to make it, it's perfectly fine to let somebody else make them for you. It's totally fine, no shame in that. But that just to say that DIY is still trending because it's a Montessori tradition. It's not just that we're trying to make things cheaper. It actually is carrying on the legacy.
Well, and I just want to underscore this quote I loved so much because it really speaks to, as a homeschooling family, what it's all about. What she's saying in this is that don't get hung up in all the big stuff. Like, you can always make something old fancy, right?
Yeah.
That's what she's saying. You can take something that's well known and just make it fancier and fancier and fancier. AKA, you buy your child a really elaborate toy. And what they get really interested in is the bubble wrap or the box. Because at the end of the day, we put so much emphasis on the old because it's comfortable. But instead, we need to have confidence in the simplicity of life, that there's something in there that we can accomplish even when things are very, very basic, like a handmade set of sandpaper letters.
Sorry, I lost my train of thought. You can keep on going. I was going to talk about the explosion into writing.
Well, we need to wrap up with that. But yeah, so it's from this that the kids go bananas for this, right? They start marching around the room with the letters over their head. She didn't actually, I think, want to introduce the letters at all. It's just the children were clamoring for more and more and more. And so she's like, okay, we'll try this. And they go crazy for it. It's just amazing. And then this event happens, and this kind of made me tear up. So I'm going to read this last part. And
okay.
It was a winter's day in December, bright with sunlight, and we went up on the terrace with the children. They were running around, playing freely. Some of them were around me. I was sitting next to a chimney stack, and I said to the 5-year-old boy near me, offering him a piece of chalk, "Draw this chimney." Obedient, he squatted on the ground and drew the chimney on the pavement, reproducing it in a recognizable fashion. So, as is my way with the little ones, I burst into exclamations of praise. The boy looked at me, smiled, waited for a minute as though ready to explode in some act of joy, and then shouted, "I can write! I can write!" and sat stooped over on the ground and wrote mono, hand. Then, excited, wrote again camino, chimney, and then tetto, roof. As he was writing, he kept on shouting out loud, "I can write! I know how to write!" So loud that the other children heard him and came over to stand around him in a circle, looking at him in amazement. 2 or 3 of them said to me, shaking, "Give me the chalk. I want to write too." And in fact, they wrote out various words, mama, mano, gino, camino, ada. None of them had ever held chalk or any other writing instrument in hand. It was the first time they wrote, and they traced out a whole word, as though the first time they spoke, they said a whole word. It's amazing.
Made me cry on camera.
So this is Maria. She's reflecting. This is in 1907. She's been at it for several months.
Yeah.
She's introduced these letters. She's very, very conscious about not trying to actively teach them to write or read. And this child says, "I can write." That is the magic of education.
And it happens like that. It really does.
It does. It's right. I mean, it feels fanciful, but I think this is, again, to underscore the theme of this, is faith. She was willing to let the child try. She had faith that there was something within the child, and it came through. And she sees the world as, I think, because in a way she herself had felt limited and feels limited, she is maybe sensitive to that, but she recognizes that the world puts lots and lots of crazy confining rules on people, especially people who are not of the in-group, children, for example, or women. And those rules are just completely stifling. But if you are willing to look beyond them, you'll find within them something amazing. And then if you trust in that and have faith in that, I can write.
Yeah, and maybe not I can write, but I can something. And I don't know that there's anybody who is here with us today who hasn't witnessed some kind of amazing joy on the child's face when they have done something that they're super excited about and proud of. And part of being a Montessorian is taking that moment and saying, this is a time for reverence.
That's
This
right.
is not a time to praise the child so that they can do it again and say, oh yes, of course you can write, or turn the key, or whatever it is the child is doing. Make a track, make a train track, or I'm so proud of you for it. Child doesn't need that. What they need is our just our shared exuberance with them.
Yeah, and this child didn't need a speak and spell or a fancy app
No.
or anything else. He needed a piece of chalk and a slate to write on the ground, and the encouragement of someone who loved and respected him. And that unlocked it, because within the child was that capacity.
And that's why everybody can do Montessori.
That's why we can homeschool.
Whether you have the materials or not, no matter how much money you have.
Whether you DIY or you buy something like this or you buy something fancier, it doesn't really matter. It's within your capacity to do it, because it's within the child's capacity. And that's the big lesson here. Right. That's the lesson of part 2.
Yep, that's it.
Okay.
So, thank you for coming. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed those stories as well. For next time, we're actually going to work on part 3.
Part 3.
And that'll be in a couple weeks. You got a couple of weeks to read that. These sections are not very long.
Nope.
So, yeah.
Yes, and get a copy at your library. See if they'll get one to keep on the shelf. It's a wonderful book, super readable. So anyone who's interested, and even if you're not particularly interested in Montessori, it's a wonderful
it's just a fun
exploration
biography.
Of the time. Just this depiction of what's happening in society at this time in Europe is fascinating in itself. So, but thank you so much for spending an hour with us. I appreciate that. Yeah.
We'll see you next time, friends.
Bye.